Ever since I first watched the anime Overlord, I wanted to play D&D as Ainz. He's a min-maxing necromancer who uses his knowledge of the game and its systems to take over a brand new fantasy world. Overlord's creator actually based the entire manga on a D&D game. This was in 3.5e. The days where min-maxers could have their fun across 50 different source books and splat books. But the thing is, in 5e specifically, there are 5 reasons why you can't build Ainz Ooal Gown as your next player character. But don't despair. At the end of this video, I will tell you the method that I believe gets the closest to playing Overlord in 5e. The first reason you can't really build Ainz Ooal Gown as a player character in 5e is simply because he's a necromancer. For context, we're just going to assume any build you can come up with for Ainz is a reborn 20th level wizard in the necromancer specialism with high intelligence and secondary pretty good charisma. But the thing is, Animate Dead and the entire necromancer build does not enable you to command undead armies at will. About the best you're going to get through judicious use of spell slots and reading the very fine print of all of your spells is around about 300 undead under your direct command. That's the upper reasonable limit for most tables and most games at 20th level. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of undead. But Ainz is a special case. In the manga and anime, he controls hordes of the things. Not just hundreds, thousands upon thousands of higher level undead than you would be able to control with Animate Dead for sure. We're talking Death Knights and Liches under his very control. That obscene amount of power is not really feasible for a player to have. Even if it were rules legal, any DM worth their salt would veto that straight off. If you had an army worth thousands and multiple liches under your very command, why would you ever need to go adventuring? Why would you even need to play the game of Dungeons and Dragons? The second reason why it's going to be really tough to create Ainz Ooal Gown as your PC in D&D 5e is the absolute glut of magic items that he possesses. I mean, seriously, it's insane, and some of these things are powerful. In the very first episode of the anime, Ainz has dozens upon dozens of artifact class world items, which are pretty much legendary items in D&D. Some of these that we can best stat out in D&D are a Ring of 3 Wishes, already an insanely broken item for anyone to have. And also there's the Staff of Ainz Ooal Gown, one of the strongest items Ainz owns, which, among many other things, as an example, has the power to summon a primal fire elemental, which probably has about the same destructive power as the CR19 Imix from Princes of the Apocalypse. Just so we're aware of what we're dealing with. Additionally, I mean, the man has an entire lair from the start. Not just a lair, the lair. So powerful and so magically warded that his companions and his servants can teleport freely at will using a specialist magic item around the place. Now, I don't want to just argue that you can't build Ainz Ooal Gown in D&D 5e because it would be broken. I want to argue that this is literally impossible. No teleportation effect in Dungeons and Dragons works that way, but also attunement is a massive issue for Ainz. You get 3 attunement slots. And with the amount of magical items that guy is packing, as well as the amount of powerful magic items which almost always require attunement, I think it will be almost impossible to rival his power level based on magic items alone. The third reason why it's going to be super tough in 5e to build Ainz Ooal Gown is his allies. I know, you don't really consider allies as part of your character, but in Overlord itself, it is stated that these allies are unflinchingly loyal to and are essentially his non-player characters. A retinue of individuals who are surrounding him and constantly bigging him up and doing things for him. Let me preface this by saying that none of his allies are especially impossible to create in D&D 5e, not as much as the man himself, but it is the collection of them that make it utterly and completely pointless, once more, to even be an adventurer. What is the purpose in developing a character sheet for you as a player? For you to then have probably 2 demon lords in Albedo and Demiurge, as well as a elder vampire and multiple other 9th level magic users. These guys are your companions, but even they would form a formidable 20th level adventuring party. No published threat in Dungeons & Dragons could stand up to even the retinue of companions that Ainz has around him. If you have an entire party of essentially CR 20 and above monsters on your side, no singular threat is ever going to come close to challenging you. Note that I said singular. I've alluded to our 4th reason a few times already. Ainz, as written in Overlord, is simply too powerful for D&D. Let me explain. I'm talking about his magic here. Multiple times along the show and the manga, Ainz is seen casting spells beyond 9th tier. We can assume that these are roughly equivalent to 9th level spells in D&D, especially as the creator was influenced by D&D in creating the world. Now, spells beyond 9th tier or 9th level do exist even in the Forgotten Realms setting, but almost invariably these spells cause massive problems and severely impact the individuals who create them. Indeed, individuals needed to create their own spells beyond these levels. Ainz has a suite of spells beyond 9th level, which he just simply has, and don't take terribly much out of him either. At the time of filming this, Dungeons & Dragons has 536 published spells. In Overlord, it is stated that Ainz knows over 700. Now, when I'm talking published spells, I'm talking all spell lists, all classes, anything that could reasonably be construed as a spell. Ainz's personal learned spellbook is larger than the entire library of Dungeons & Dragons. This includes every cleric, druid, ranger spell that is not traditionally on the wizard spell list. Level 20 simply isn't enough to categorize this man. We're talking multiple epic level boons on top of a level 20 character, which itself is an optional feature. We're talking multiple level ups on top of the highest level in the game, and additional provisions for perhaps creating or perhaps casting spells beyond 9 level. Routinely. And while we're talking about spells, this is where our 5th point comes in. Ainz fundamentally does not function within the design space of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, at least on the player side. For much of its history, wizards in Dungeons & Dragons have used Vancian magic. That is a magic system that relies on them preparing spells in the morning and expending them, being unable to cast said spells after use. Now, in 5th edition, this has been streamlined and changed a little bit so that preparing spells for the day means that these spells can be cast multiple times as long as spell slots are maintained. All of this is to say, Ainz doesn't use either. From what it seems, Ainz has every spell he knows prepared at all times, and is able to cast any combination of these spells as long as he has enough mana left to do so. Now, it's not really a spoiler to say that Overlord is also somewhat based on MMORPGs, in addition to its Dungeons & Dragons influence. The mana system taken from video games does not fit very well at all within D&D's design space. Add to that the fact that potions exist in his world that restore his mana pool, and you have a caster that essentially never runs out of spells he's prepared and never runs out of ways to cast them, as long as enough resources can be spent. In other words, if he has the money and the carrying capacity to do so, Ainz has infinite magic. Now, in a game where one of the greatest rewards of playing a caster to a high level is the ability to cast one single 9th level spell a day, and where one of the most powerful epic level boons after hitting level 20 and moving on to what would be level 21 is the ability to have one more 9th level spell slot, it is no small wonder that Ainz's ability to continually cast spell after spell after spell, especially if they're above 9th level epic tier magic, is utterly and completely antithetical to the entire design of 5th edition. In terms of Ainz's magic, there is no resource management, there is no daily spell selection, there is no challenge. There can be no situation where you say, damn, I would love to have this spell right now, but I don't have it prepared. I need to make a sacrifice and ritually cast it, taking a lot more time to do so. That's all out of the window. When I say you can't play Ainz in a 5e table, this is the fundamental breaking point. He breaks the game, and not in the cute little, I've discovered how to become God, which weirdly was absolutely doable in 3.5e, but in the I should be playing a completely different game. Ainz is not just too strong for your DM to handle. He cannot exist as a player character sheet. Now, I promised you a solution, and I've been all doom and gloom. Maybe you will never get to play the true Overlord in D&D. Well, here's a secret. Everything I've talked about so far is from a player's perspective. Those astute among you may have seen where I was going this whole time. As a dungeon master, here's how you play Ainz Ooal Gown. First, you're going to want to make him a deity level threat, on the range of about Tiamat, maybe a bit higher. Because seriously, this guy does still break the game. He is going to be an NPC, or a big bad evil guy if you're feeling very spicy, and he's going to be under control of the dungeon master. Likely a villain, or perhaps a quest giver or something of that nature. You will use the spellcasting rules accompanying many monster stat blocks where they can cast things at will, or twice a day, 3 times a day, and you will buff up all of those numbers so that he can probably cast up to 5th level at will, and every other of his spells probably 3 times a day. This will effectively emulate his limitless mana. Now, to emulate his limitless spell list, well, I'm afraid you may well have to give him every spell possible. It's going to be a nightmare to run as a DM, so maybe pick the 50 best spells in the game and see what you can do with that. You can also try and homebrew some epic tier magic beyond 9th level. As I said, the Forgotten Realms lore could be an interesting place to start for inspiration in that regard. And my key recommendation for playing Ainz in your game is to give your players carte blanche to make the most broken thing they possibly can in D&D 5e. Give them a group of players, all with a single common goal, and see what they can do. Of course, they're going to have to fight their way through an elder vampire, a couple of demon lords, so many fighters, casters, and traps throughout the Great Tomb of Nazarick. This is probably going to be a 4 or 5 session adventure, if they don't die in session 1. This is one of those adventure concepts, like the original Tomb of Horrors, where the prestige of it comes with how far you can get. Not whether you win, but how far your group of characters is able to get to beating this ultimate Overlord. It has the makings of a really good 2 or 3 or 4 shot collection of sessions. to take a break from your regular campaign, especially if your players are into facing insurmountable odds and prevailing against all expectation, or if they happen to like banging their head against brick walls. And the last thing you should do if you're preparing my suggestion here, prepare to kill them. Like, a lot. 20th level characters are tough as nails, but epic level magic should be pretty powerful. And this guy, the Overlord, master of essentially every spell in Dungeons and Dragons, he won't make it easy. Thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed. Please, if you've enjoyed the video, hit like and definitely subscribe. It really helps me out as a smaller channel. If you have any ideas of what you'd like me to cover next, please let me know in the comments. With that said, I'm Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master, and I'll see you in the next one.